Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on chapter 166. Chapter 166. The Emperor of Russia had, meanwhile, been in Vilna for more than a month, reviewing troops and holding maneuvers. Nothing was ready for the war that everyone expected and to prepare for which the Emperor had come from Petersburg. There was no general plan of action. The vacillation between the various plans that were proposed had even increased after the Emperor had been at headquarters for a month. Each of the three armies had its own commander-in-chief, but there was no supreme commander of all the forces, and the Emperor did not assume that responsibility himself. The longer the Emperor remained in Vilna, the less did everybody, tired of waiting, prepare for the war. All the efforts of those who surrounded the sovereign seemed directed merely to making him spend his time pleasantly and forget that war was impending. In June, after many balls and fêtes given by the Polish magnates, by the courtiers, and by the Emperor himself, it occurred to one of the Polish aides-de-camps in attendance that a dinner and a ball should be given for the Emperor by his aides-de-camp. This idea was eagerly received. The Emperor gave his consent. The aides-de-camp collected money by subscription. The lady who was thought to be the most pleasing to the Emperor was invited to act as hostess. Count Benningsen, being a landowner in the Vilna province, offered his country house for the fête, and the 13th of June was fixed for a ball, dinner, regatta, and fireworks at Zakrit, Count Benningsen's country seat. The very day that Napoleon issued the order to cross the Niemen, and his vanguard, driving off the Cossacks, crossed the Russian frontier, Alexander spent the evening at the entertainment given by his aides-de-camp at Benningsen's country house. It was a gay and brilliant fête. Connoisseurs of such matters declared that rarely had so many beautiful women been assembled at one place. Countess Bezikova was present among the other Russian ladies who had followed the sovereign from Petersburg to Vilna and eclipsed the refined Polish ladies by her massive, so-called Russian type of beauty. The Emperor noticed her and honored her with a dance. Boris Drubetskoy, having left his wife in Moscow and being for the present un garçon, as he phrased it, was also there, and though not an aide-de-camp, had subscribed a large sum toward the expenses. Boris was now a rich man who had risen to high honors and no longer sought patronage, but stood on an equal footing with the highest of those of his own age. He was meeting Helene in Vilna, after not having seen her for a long time, and did not recall the past. But as Helene was enjoying the favors of a very important personage, and Boris had only recently married, they met as good friends of long standing. At midnight, dancing was still going on. Helene, not having a suitable partner, herself offered to dance the mazurka with Boris. They were the third couple. Boris, coolly looking at Helene's dazzling bare shoulders, which emerged from a dark, gold-embroidered gauze gown, talked to her of old acquaintances, and at the same time, unaware of it himself and unnoticed by others, never for an instant ceased to observe the Emperor, who was in the same room. The Emperor was not dancing. He stood in the doorway, stopping now one pair and now another with gracious words which he alone knew how to utter. As the Marzouka began, Boris saw that Adjutant General Balashev, one of those in closest attendance on the Emperor, went up to him, and contrary to court etiquette, stood near him while he was talking to a Polish lady. Having finished speaking to her, the Emperor looked inquiringly at Balashev, and, evidently understanding that he only acted thus because there were very important reasons for so doing, nodded slightly to the lady, and turned to him. Hardly had Balashev begun to speak before a look of amazement appeared on the emperor's face. He took Balashev by the arm and crossed the room with him, unconsciously clearing a path 7 yards wide as the people on both sides made way for him. Boris noticed Arkachev's excited face when the sovereign went out with Balashev. Arkachev looked at the emperor from under his brow, and sniffing with his red nose, stepped forward from the crowd, as if expecting the emperor to address him. Boris understood that Arkachev envied Balashev, and was displeased that evidently important news had reached the emperor otherwise than through himself. But the emperor and Balashev passed out into the illuminated garden without noticing Arkachev, who, holding his sword and glancing wrathfully around, followed some 20 paces behind them. All the time, Boris was going through the figures of the Marzuka. He was worried by the question of what news Balashev had brought and how he could find out before others. In the figure in which he had to choose 2 ladies, he whispered to Helene that he meant to choose Countess Potocka, who, he thought, had gone out into the veranda, and glided over the parquet to the door opening into the garden, where, seeing Balashev and the emperor returning to the veranda, he stood still. They were moving toward the door. Boris, fluttering as if he had not time to withdraw, respectfully pressed close to the doorpost with bowed head. The emperor, with the agitation of one who has been personally affronted, was finishing with these words: "To enter Russia without declaring war? I will not make peace as long as a single armed enemy remains in my country." It seemed to Boris that it gave the emperor pleasure to utter these words. He was satisfied with the form in which he had expressed his thoughts, but displeased that Boris had overheard it. "Let no one know of it," the emperor added, with a frown. Boris understood that this was meant for him, and closing his eyes, slightly bowed his head. The emperor re-entered the ballroom and remained there for another half-hour. Boris was thus the first to learn the news that the French army had crossed the Niemen, and thanks to this was able to show certain important personages that much of what was concealed from others was usually known to him, and by this means he rose higher in their estimation. The unexpected news of the French having crossed the Niemen was particularly startling after a month of unfulfilled expectations and at a ball. On first receiving the news, under the influence of indignation and resentment, the emperor had found a phrase that pleased him, fully expressed his feelings, and has since become famous. On returning home at 2 o'clock that night, he sent for his secretary, Shishkov, and told him to write an order to the troops and rescript the field marshal Prince Saltykov, in which he insisted on the words being inserted that he would not make peace so long as a single armed Frenchman remained on Russian soil. Next day, the following letter was sent to Napoleon. Monsieur mon frère, yesterday I learned that, despite the loyalty with which I have kept my engagements with your Majesty, your troops have crossed the Russian frontier, and I have this moment received from Petersburg a note, in which Count Lorrain informs me, as a reason for this aggression, that your Majesty has considered yourself to be in a state of war with me from the time Prince Karakin asked for his passports. The reasons on which the Duke de Bassano based his refusal to deliver them to him would never have led me to suppose that could serve as a pretext for aggression. In fact, the ambassador, as he himself has declared, was never authorized to make that demand, and as soon as I was informed of it, I let him know how much I disapproved of it, and ordered him to remain at his post. If your Majesty does not intend to shed the blood of our peoples for such a misunderstanding, and consents to withdraw your troops from Russian territory, I will regard what has passed as not having occurred, and an understanding between us will be possible. In the contrary case, your Majesty, I shall see myself forced to repel an attack that nothing on my part has provoked. It still depends on your Majesty to preserve humanity from the calamity of another war. Signed, Alexander. All right, things are heating up. That's the conclusion of my reading of chapter 166. I hope you liked it. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 166. The game is the game. Some people procrastinate, others plan. Tsar Alexander is a procrastinator. Boris Trubetskoy is a planner. The contrast between the two are presented in stark relief in today's chapter. The procrastinators are in charge. Everyone expects Napoleon to bring war, but no one seems interested in preparing for it. Alexander has come all the way from Petersburg to Vilna for the express purpose of war preparation, and yet nothing gets done save for the planning of a ball or two. Boris makes sure he attends these balls, even though he has already climbed up about as high on the Russian social ladder as he can hope to climb. He's a rich man now that he's married to Julie Karagina. But grind is life, so when Boris's keen eyes note that Alexander is getting some important news at the ball, he makes sure he's there to hear it too. That's how Boris learns of Napoleon's invasion before anyone else. We've spoke harshly of Boris before, but you have to give it to him. The man knows what he wants and how to get it. You'll find no slack in his game. Boris is always on. He sets goals and then immediately sets out to achieve them. Sometimes I feel his inauthenticity can be forgiven just because of the sheer commitment, discipline, and dedication with which he plays his game. There's something there we could all learn from, especially if we devote ourselves to virtuous ends. Daily meditation. Do not act as if thou wert going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over thee. While thou livest, while it is in thy power, be good. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. All right, so that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 166 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 167 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others. But the Emperor and Balashev What are you, fucking Tony Soprano over here?